On April 13th, 2021, Paul Flores was arrested for the 1996 murder of Cal Poly freshman Kristin Smart. His father, Ruben Flores, was also arrested and charged with accessory after the fact. After over a year and a long preliminary trial and an even longer trial, today, October 18th, 2022, the Smart family finally has justice for their daughter. This is Kristin Smart, The Verdict. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to update you on the case of Kristin Smart. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Thank you for joining us. Now, this is going to be a very quick update episode. We haven't, written anything down really. This is just basically to give you an update on the Paul Flores trial. I don't want to call it the Kristin Smart trial because she's not on trial, even though,
right.
A lot of people refer to it that way. This is the Paul and Ruben Flores trial. After weeks and weeks of testimony, and 4 days of deliberation, in the Paul Flores case, we do have both of the verdicts today. So just to catch you up, and I've done a few TikToks on this, and more importantly, if you're interested in this case at all, please, if you haven't been already, go listen to the Your Own Backyard podcast. So Chris Lambert, a lot of you know, and we mentioned this when we did our two-parter on Kristin Smart, he's the one that really brought this case back into the limelight and kind of pressured investigators to look back into it because he started it, I believe, in 2017. So, over 20 years after Kristin Smart's Memorial Day weekend murder in 1996. And Paul Flores has been a suspect from the very beginning, and nothing was being done. Once his podcast came out, though, the investigation did get started back up. And, in April of last year, both Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested. And I and many, many people believe that 100% would not have happened if it weren't for the podcast. So we're just going to give you the quick overview of what's been going on and what the verdict was. Just to talk a little bit about the trial, Chris has been doing weekly recaps of it because he's been in the courtroom every day, and I've been listening to those. I did make a prediction that did not come true.
Which was?
So Paul Flores is a slimy weasel, basically. And he has spent his entire life getting out of situations and not having to take responsibility for his actions for one reason or another. Whether it's because the justice system was kind of working in his favor or his parents were helping him, cover things up. He's never faced real consequences. One of the things that came up in the trial to a degree, because there was a lot that the judge deemed not admissible for this trial, and we covered this briefly in our episodes, is that in the past 20 years since this murder happened, Paul Flores has been accused by multiple women of drugging them and sexually assaulting them. This is an MO of his, apparently. There are many women who have come out and said that this has happened to them over the years, and a few of them were able to testify in this trial.
Oh, so the judge did let a few testify?
Yes.
That's really rare.
Yeah, no, I know. It was, terrible, honestly, hearing about it. Yeah, so 2 women, I believe, actually testified, and it was just awful, but there are way more than 2. But he has never faced criminal consequences for these. So my prediction was, I was listening to Lambert's recaps of this trial, and he was really great at taking detailed notes because you can't have like audio or, visual equipment in the courtroom. So he had to just handwrite his notes. But Paul Flores' lawyer, Robert Sanger, didn't really seem to be very good at his job. And in his defense, there's a lot of evidence against Paul. So there really wasn't a lot he could work with there, but his questions were completely asinine. And it seemed to be clear, at least from, Chris's retelling of it, that neither the judge nor the jury particularly liked him. The big crux of the case is that Paul Flores was one of the last people to see Kristin Smart alive. He and another friend walked her home to her dorm from a frat party.
Right.
It was him and a girl, and she left, and he said, yeah, I'll get her the rest of the way home. It's on my way. And Kristin never made it home. So the defense was basically, obviously broad overview, the defense was basically, well, what if she did make it home? That was a big part of it. And so they called her roommates and suite mates and friends, and everybody's like, what? No, she didn't come home. And they're like, but what if she climbed in the window? Or, it's just like,
are you sure that was the last time you saw her?
Yeah. And it's like, no, we were sleeping in the room. Like, we would have known. And they're like, but would you have? And then, there's a big thing with the cadaver dogs alerting on Paul's room,
right?
Specifically his bed, his mattress, and his trash can,
Which had already been cleaned.
Yeah, exactly. And so, obviously they tried to discredit that in a myriad ways. But my favorite was Sanger asked multiple witnesses, hey, did you know that Paul Flores worked at this on-campus restaurant? And they're like, I don't know. Did he? And they're like, did you know that he made beef tip sandwiches there? And they're like, wait, what? It was just a bizarre line of questioning, but what he was apparently trying to get at
was that the cadaver dogs hit on the scent of
beef tip sandwiches.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the dog handler was like, that is not how this works. What? How do you think we would get anywhere if dogs would alert on sandwiches?
Right.
It was just, not to make light of the situation, but there were parts of this that were so ridiculous. It just seems surreal. And that was definitely one of them. The prosecution's theory of the case is that Paul took Kristin back to his dorm room and either attempted to rape or raped her. And during that process, she died in some way. Whether it was on purpose or an accident, obviously they don't know. But they do believe that Kristin Smart died in that room and that Paul Flores called his father, Ruben Flores, to help him out and dispose of the body. They believe that the body had been moved several times, and at one point, fairly recently, she was located under the deck of Ruben Flores' home. So that's kind of how Ruben got, roped into this. Now, they did ground penetrating radar. They did all these soil tests to determine if, there was a body under there. There was not a body under there. But there was a good amount of evidence that there had been. And based on what was and wasn't in the soil, the prosecution believes that she had been wrapped up in a tarp or some other impermeable material and had been under there. So there weren't the things that you would expect to see if just a body alone had been in there, but there was enough to indicate that something happened under there. Because again, a tarp, isn't completely airtight. It's not completely waterproof.
Right.
So,
but there wouldn't be a large amount of detritus.
Exactly.
Or
blood or anything like that.
Right.
So they did find, some, but that's kind of what they thought. Now, some of the tests that indicated like human remains apparently could also be indicative of ferrets. So that was another thing that Sanger tried to do, was like, well, but maybe there were just dead ferrets under his yard, under his deck.
Like a whole litter of
I don't
ferrets
know.
that just died.
Yeah. Like, and there was literally a like 4x6 section of soil that indicated there was a body there.
Or ferrets.
Or a buckload of ferrets or weasels at one point. Like, I mean, it was bad. And he had these, you know, he had his experts, the defense had their experts, and they were just like not at all. They're like, oh, well, I read a study about a thing once, and I've done a lot of studies on birds. Like, none of it made any sense. So I was thinking that Paul was going to go through the majority of this trial and kind of get a feel for how things were going. And then I thought he was going to take a plea deal.
Oh.
Because ultimately, I mean, while the Smarts, you know, obviously want to see him in prison, they want their daughter back. Kristin Smart, by all indications, was under that deck, but it is believed that she was moved in early 2021, and nobody knows where she is now. As early as 2010, Paul's lawyer at the time had indicated that, you know, like, hey, if you give us a sweet deal, like maybe I can get him to tell you where the body is.
I mean, without actually saying that, because that would be incriminating.
Yeah. But I mean, there was stuff like that. Like, it was just ridiculous, right? So I really thought he was just going to try to weasel his way into a deal. You know, when the trial concluded, when the jury went to deliberations and they were deliberating for, you know, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and there wasn't any talk of a deal. Like, I was actually surprised because I really didn't think that it would come down to this, you know, because he has such a sense of self-preservation that I figured he would have seen how this was going for him and bailed out sooner. But again, I don't know. I mean, with somebody like this who's maybe a narcissist, I don't know, like he just thinks that everything's going to work out for him in the end, I guess.
Well, I mean, up to this point, it has.
Well, exactly. So the verdict came in today, this afternoon, California time, and Paul Flores was found guilty of first-degree murder. And that was not a shock, given the evidence. What was kind of a shock was that his father, Ruben, was found not guilty.
Right. I saw that.
Yeah. So he was found not guilty, which, you know, my first reaction was like, how? Like, it is so clear. You know, they laid out the story that makes perfect sense, which is, you know, Ruben brought him the truck, and the truck, you know, that's how they transported her body. He helped his son bury her. He helped his son move her. He knew about this the whole time. You know, they laid out a good story, but once I stopped and thought about it, it really is all circumstantial when it comes to him. And
right. There's no actual hard evidence that he did any of it.
That he knew about
that
it,
he
right?
Knew,
like,
yes.
Because there is hard evidence that Kristin was buried at his home, but Paul was living at that home.
Right.
So, like, you know, there's just no hard evidence that Ruben Flores knew about any of this. And do I think he did? Like 155%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But
I get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate. That's the system.
Yes, this sucks. Like, he is guilty as hell. He got off, but I understand why the jury came to that conclusion, and I respect it because, you know, that's the conclusion we want them to come to when there really isn't hard evidence, even if you know, quote unquote, that he's guilty.
Yeah, I mean, there's reasonable doubt, so they have to act on that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but I mean, he's also in his 80s. He's going to be dead soon anyway. He looks like a leather shoe. So, like, I'm not terribly worried about it. But I do want to say, like, the way this trial worked is Ruben and Paul had separate juries because there were pieces of evidence in Paul's trial that the judge ruled would be prejudicial in Ruben's trial. So they wanted to keep the juries separate so that Ruben's jury couldn't hear certain issues. So the way it would work is Paul's attorney would do his cross and then Ruben's attorney would do his cross, and they'd like switch out the juries between this. Yeah, it was
Seems really complicated.
It was. So the trial was held, all at the same time, but with two different juries. Paul Flores's lawyer, Sanger, he obviously had like a much heavier load to bear because one, it's first degree murder versus accessory after the fact.
Right.
And, there's obviously a lot more evidence against Paul than there was Ruben. So Sanger did most of the questioning, and then Misek, Ruben's attorney, would just kind of come in and do little things afterwards. So I didn't really have much of an opinion on Ruben's attorney until today when the verdict came out. And I read this quote by him. Like, fuck that guy. So this is a quote from SanLuisObispo.com that was published today. And this was after the verdict. And, of course, like the press is asking all the lawyers and everybody for comment. Misek said Ruben Flores now has to go home, quote, and rebuild the deck that was destroyed, end quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not even like a mention of his son going to prison. He has to go rebuild it.
Well, no, there is. He gets to that. But that was his lead. And it's like not even like, hey, there's a murdered girl here. My client had his deck destroyed, which he didn't. He had the fucking lattice work like messed with. Like the deck is still there. I don't know. But regardless, what an unbelievably classless thing to say. He went on to say that he feels that there is, quote, reasonable inference, end quote, that Smart is still alive, and that he thought Paul Flores' attorney will likely file for a new trial since, quote, there are plenty of grounds, end quote. He's out here. Like, here's the thing. You're the lawyer in a very high profile case, and your client just got acquitted.
Yeah, just leave.
Like, you could just say nothing.
Just don't say anything.
Just say nothing.
Yeah.
Make a little boilerplate like, we're happy the justice system worked, blibbity blue, whatever the fuck.
Right.
And then get the fuck out of there and go on vacation and don't talk to anybody else.
Yeah, that's what he should have done.
What a dick. This is why people don't like defense attorneys, Well, that in Law and Order, because,
Right.
But it's stuff like that. It's like, just say nothing. I don't understand. There are obviously going to be a lot of appeals. Paul Flores has not been sentenced yet. Sentencing will come later. It's still going to be a process. I cannot imagine that Paul will ever at this point give up any more information about where Kristin is unless he gets something for it.
Right.
And
which they still could.
They could. I just don't know that there's anything
to life instead of death or.
Yeah, but it's California. Like, he's not.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. I just don't think there's anything good enough because apparently in 2010, the deal that they were trying to work out was that he literally didn't go to prison at all.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's like.
So, and he still didn't because obviously they weren't going to accept that. But I don't know. But I was wrong about him taking a plea deal. So literally, what do I know? All I know is that when the verdict for Paul was read, Stan Smart, Kristin's dad, smiled and he put his arm around his wife. And so they have at least gotten some measure of justice. There is no closure.
No.
Especially with Kristin still out there.
Right.
But they know that after 25 plus years that this guy who has hurt Kristin and hurt so many other women is finally facing consequences. So it's not perfect.
No, but at least there's some semblance of justice here.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, that's all. We just wanted to bring you the update. Like I said, go listen to Your Own Backyard. We will still be coming back with our normal episode this Friday. And we will see you then.
See you then.
You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheywere.gone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. Our research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!